Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Fourth and Frames. I'm Rhett Manuel with my co-host, Drew Scott. Our other host, Chris Battistell, could not be in here this evening. We wish he was here with us, though. But week 5 is up in smoke, and tonight we'll be breaking down our Bussin, Disgussin, and mid players for week 6, our panic button players and ring the alarm, and our frame and flex players. Fourth and Frames, let's get it. And to all our listeners and viewers, thank you for being with us tonight. We appreciate you as always. And like we do it every week, we're going to go ahead and start it off going around the frames and discussing a little bit of our fantasy week. Albert, how you doing, man? It's great to have you as always. So, Drew, go ahead and drop us a line. You weren't with us last week. Tell me about your fantasy week this week, man. How'd it go?
It's actually the best fantasy week I think I've had all season. I won both of the big tournament leagues I'm in, the Megala Bowl with the fantasy footballers and the Scott Fish Bowl. I got a win in both of those leagues. My home league redraft, I am 4-1 now through 5 weeks, although I just got hit with the Devon Achane and Anthony Richardson IR play, so that doesn't feel very good. Both dynasty leagues. One dynasty league, our fantasy and frames dynasty league, I thought I was going to be kind of like tanking, but then the last couple of weeks, my team started to kind of take off. But then my other main home dynasty league, I'm in a full tank mode, and I'm right now I'm on track for the number 2 overall pick, hoping to work my way down to number 1. So that league is going just as planned. So overall, it was a really, really good fantasy week. But how about yourself?
Man, a little bit up and down this week. Have a couple home leagues that I play with some homeboys. One of them is going really well. Deep running back stable in there. Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler, same roster somehow. Don't ask, don't tell. But we did get hit. We did get hit with the Richardson bug in that one, so we're gonna have to ride that Minshew train this week in the Superflex. Other home league scored 250 and lost. That was tough. Some weird rules in that one, but 250 and lost. One dynasty league, the one I decided to go all in on. I have a man accusing me of some trade hijinks after I ended up getting 3 fantasy starters out of him. So we're trying to get a ring out of that one this year. So all in all, pretty good week as always. And even if it wasn't a good week, win or loss wise, fantasy football is always a blast. It's always fun. So we have a blast with it. Yeah. So let's go ahead and let's get into the thing we get into every week, talking about injury news and headlines and fantasy football impact throughout the NFL. Starting off with one that has affected both of us. Anthony Richardson with an AC joint sprain has now hit the injured reserve list. He will be out for at least the next 4 games. One that has affected probably both fantasy and dynasty in terms of redraft. Justin Jefferson with a hamstring, injured reserve. Ouch, because that guy is fun. But I wanted to ask you with that, Drew. There's now a gap in that wide receiver room in Minnesota. So are you riding for the rest of the for these next at least 4 weeks, KJ Osborne, Jordan Addison, or are you riding the TJ Hockenson train?
Yes, to 2 of those guys, to 2 of the 3. But I don't want to give too much right now, because then that'll spoil all the fun here in a little bit, because one of the guys you just listed just so happens to be my Bussin play for this week. So I'll leave that for a little bit later into the show, but I will just say I am very much so in on one of these Minnesota Vikings wide receivers.
I'll say this for myself. I'm really into the idea of KJ Osborne perhaps being that guy who's going to be a little more steady and possibly be a guy that's going to get a lot more volume in these coming weeks. So I will say that I think KJ Osborne does get more of a tick up in value as these weeks go on. Continuing with that, we have Devon Achane also hitting IR with a knee injury. James Conner with yet another knee injury hitting IR. Any of those Arizona backs worth owning?
I think Keontae Ingram and I don't want to spoil his. I don't want to completely butcher his name. You help me out with the other running back in Arizona. Do you have a correct pronunciation?
No, I don't. To be honest with you,
I'll tell you what. I will do.
I
I'll do
know his
my
name is
best.
Amari. So though,
Yeah, we'll just say Amari. I think it's Demarcado, but I don't really know 100% if that's the right way to say it. But regardless, the Demarcado or Keontae Ingram, I think they both should be rostered. You know, it was a big news blurb came out that Keontae Ingram was listed as the starter on the depth chart, and it is worth noting that Ingram has been out the last couple weeks, and I think right now it's looking like he's going to be back this week. So I don't think it's I think it's going to be a timeshare in an offense where necessarily I don't know if you're going to be too excited to start either running back, but um, Amari's the one that I would be prioritizing just because I think he's looked better the last couple weeks than Keontae Ingram has looked over the last couple years, even though I like Ingram or I have in the past. But I think that could be one where guys spent a lot of money on the Arizona backfield this week, and they might end up a little disappointed.
yeah, it seems like it is going to be an interesting situation in there for sure. Got a trade question from Super CNB Challengers. What's up, buddy? He just got offered Bijan, Aaron Jones, and DK Metcalf for Stephon Diggs and CD Lamb in PPR. Drew, what do you think of that deal?
Um, I think it is a little bit team dependent. You're trading two top end receivers for two running backs and then another solid receiver. I don't hate it if you're in in need of running back help. I don't necessarily hate that. Um, but very very team dependent. So I'd be curious to know number one who his other receivers are and if he is running back needy. And then number two, just Rhett, how you feel about that trade.
Yeah, same thing that you're saying right now. It really depends on the roster construction. I will say that, especially, I know this is probably a redraft situation. Um, I think that the best asset in this trade, if you're trying to win now, might be Stephon Diggs. If I'm looking at it honestly, I think Bijan is also a very good piece. So I think that's a 1-for-1 in that situation. But once again, besides that, it comes down to roster construction for sure. He's saying it would make sense for his team. He has Chase, Zay Flowers, and Justin Jefferson with pretty much only Jahmyr Gibbs at running back. So if you are giving up, just wonder what y'all think based off of value alone. So having that situation, knowing that he needs some running back help, getting Bijan and Aaron Jones with Jahmyr Gibbs and having not really worked out so far, and David Montgomery being the guy that he was, I would say that'd probably be a good value for him. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a trade that you could definitely make when knowing the context of the team, and then knowing you still get DK Metcalf back and have Jamar Chase, Zay Flowers, and then you'll have Justin Jefferson back whenever. That's a loaded team. For first of all, I don't understand how you had all those receivers in the first place, but yeah, I think that's one that you can do.
Yeah. What up, Jorge? We see you, boss man. We saw another trade question in there, a full PPR. He can only keep 3 running backs. He needs to drop one now that Jonathan Taylor is back. Who does he drop? James Cook, Montgomery, DeAndre Swift, or Jonathan Taylor? He can't make a trade until he pulls JT off of IR. That is, first off, a stacked running back room. So props to you for that.
You don't have maybe like a depth receiver you can drop or a tight end or an extra quarterback, or hell, even if your starting quarterback is like, if you're streaming quarterback, just drop your quarterback and pick, like, if you have to drop one of these running backs, for me it would be James Cook. But I don't want to drop any of them. I want to find some other way around this, like drop somebody else or or something, man. I'd be curious. I don't know, Richard, if you're still in here, if you could let us know if you have like a depth receiver you could drop, or a other position you can look at, because I wouldn't really want to do that.
I would say the easy answer, if he absolutely needs an answer, is that we know that Taylor is on a pitch count for the next 3 weeks. So if he absolutely is in a win now situation and he can't afford the roster space, I guess the easy answer is Taylor, but I'm not comfortable with that at all if he needs to. Yeah, he says he needs to keep 3 running backs. So that really does change
You
a
only
lot.
can.
Can only keep 3 of them.
Okay. So I guess we're a little bit different than that. The easy answer for me would be James Cook. That'd be the guy that I'd be dropping. I think JT's workload is going to ramp up sooner rather than later. I don't think it'll take too long. And if you've still got even if you're waiting for Taylor's work to ramp up, you've still got David Montgomery and DeAndre Swift that you can play at running back as well. So you can afford to wait for that. And I think long term, Taylor will be better than James Cook.
Yeah, I do agree with that. The boss man wants to know, what will it take for us to make a pie bet against each other over a player take, and will you make that bet this week?
Oh man, that needs to be like a season long bet, like something with a little more stake in it than 1 week. That's
Yeah,
tough.
yeah, I agree. I'm a big proponent of, like, especially in home leagues, like season long bets. Like, I had one a few years back with me and one of my buddies. We were might have been Brady's first year in Tampa, and he says, I think Mike Evans is the better player among those receivers this year. And I'm like, yeah, I think Chris Godwin is. So my man hit us with the famous line that we use in that league. He said, put 20 on it. And so we had an unofficial $20 bet, and it ended up coming down like where Chris Godwin was like 2 points better than Mike Evans over the season. It was ridiculous. So, yeah, bets like that are always fun. But like we said, Jorge, I think we're in agreement here that it has to be a season long situation. So we're gonna hash that out and get back to you on that, boss man. But I don't hate the idea at all. All right. Another question, and it looks like our man Dynasty Deviant, Fantasy and Frames family. He says he has a question. Is Baker this year's Geno Smith? Oh boy.
And he's asking this because we talked about this, that whenever things started happening with Baker at the beginning of the year off camera, we had this discussion of, we said the same thing with Seattle last year, that you can't touch DK, you can't touch Lockett, because they're going to have either Geno Smith or what's the guy that was Drew Lock throwing him the ball? Like, you just can't touch him. And then and then Geno came out and did what he did. DK, Lockett were both great. And then this offseason was, you can't touch Mike Evans, you can't touch Chris Godwin, because they're gonna have Baker Mayfield throwing him the ball. And Baker's looked pretty good. And
Yeah.
I believe, if I remember what I read a few weeks ago correctly, I'm pretty sure Tampa's offensive coordinator this year is Seattle's quarterback coach from last year. And so you even have that connection too, to where he's getting the same coaching that Geno was getting as well. So I think it's a valid statement.
Yeah, and I think, but we actually need to give people the credit where it belongs. I think we can just say, just on the record right now, that your boy Sean McVay fully healed Baker Mayfield in those few starts last year, right? Are we willing to go that far, Drew?
Yeah, we can give McVay all the credit. That's fine.
What a good-looking man, by the way. I know I said things last week, but I take it back fully. What a jawline, what a beard. Sean McVay, what a man. Anyway, Bossman has a question. Jorge Evers is asking, Geno Smith or Sam Howell rest of season? Okay. Interesting question. And at the beginning of the season, I would have said one thing, but I've seen Geno Smith have too many bad weeks so far this year, and Sam Howell have too many good weeks. So I'm gonna posture for the pay raise right now and say I think Sam Howell is probably the play for the rest of the season. Drew, what do you think?
I'm pulling something up here real quick just because I'm curious. So far as points per game goes, Sam Howell's the quarterback 14 at 17.2, and Geno is the quarterback 21 at 14.3. So there is a little bit of a
Wow.
separation there between the two. I would take Geno rest of season. Sam Howell, the Commanders have the sixth toughest schedule for fantasy quarterbacks based on what's happened through the first 5 weeks of the year, the rest of the way. And then just to kind of cap it off, now we're still a ways away from the fantasy playoffs, but just to kind of look into the future a little bit, the fantasy playoff weeks 15, 16, 17, the Commanders have the Rams, the Jets, and the 49ers championship week. So you don't necessarily love that. And then if you look at Geno's matchup in the fantasy playoffs, he has the Philadelphia Eagles, who have been a very beatable secondary, the Tennessee Titans, who are a pass funnel defense. We know that. And then the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have kind of been middle of the pack against the pass. So they have a more favorable matchup in the fantasy playoffs. Now, Geno does have a tough stretch where he has to play San Francisco twice and Dallas between weeks 12 and 14. So hopefully you aren't counting him to get you into the fantasy playoffs. But I think season long, if you have to bet on one of the guys, it would be Geno for me. But if that's the discussion you're having, you should be streaming the position and be choosing between much more people than just those two guys anyway.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, Jorge has a suggestion for our season-long bet. He says,
Deal.
For Drew, it would be Matt Stafford greater than Sam Howell in points per game. Jorge, why are you doing this to me? We know that I am a Sam Howell atheist or agnostic. I'm Sam Howell agnostic for sure. So I believe there is power there. There is certainly some power.
Real.
So I believe in the real. I believe in the realness of Sam Howell overall for the season. I'm not sure if it's healing powers for the Washington Commanders just yet, but hey, if I'm happy to be, I'll be happy to be proven wrong on just about any situation. So clip that one later, Gator. It'll be good for you. All right. So continuing on our injury reports, Danny Dobbs has a neck injury but plans to play. My guy Tank Dell has a concussion. Zay Jones played last week but re-aggravated that knee injury. Travis Kelce has an ankle injury listed as questionable but expects to play this week. Khalil Herbert has an ankle injury. Roschon Johnson has a concussion. And that Chicago backfield that has been a mess seems to be clarifying this week. So let's ask the question, is Deontay Foreman worth it this week, Drew?
Yeah. I mean, I would say so for sure. If he ends up being the lone guy in town, then I would play him. I mean, they get to play against Minnesota, so I would expect some points to need to be scored in that game. But if Roschon ends up being active, which I don't know if there's been a single player so far this year that hasn't missed at least one game after they got ruled out with a concussion, but he does have an extra day as far as that goes. So if Roschon plays, I probably wouldn't play Foreman. But if there's no Roschon, we know there's not going to be any Khalil Herbert. I'd be comfortable playing Foreman this week.
Yeah, fair enough, and I agree with that completely. Finishing up on the injury report, one of my more outspoken fantasy takes to start the season, Darren Waller. The injury has happened. Did not practice with a groin injury. Surprise, surprise. Deshaun Watson did not practice with a shoulder injury. Javonte Williams was a full participant in practice on Wednesday, so he should be a go this Sunday. My favorite New Orleans Saints receiver, Chris Olave, limited with a toe injury. And Mike Evans, who closed it out, had a hamstring injury and did not practice. So that is the injury update for you guys heading into the Thursday games this week. Just a reminder for any viewers we might have on Twitter and Facebook to move over to YouTube to ask any questions that you might have for us. We're happy to answer them. So, Drew, it's time. Our favorite time of the week, our Bussin, Disgussin, and midsection. In our Bussin, where we talk about our players of the week outside of the top 20 in wide receivers, outside of the top 15 in running backs, outside of the top 8 in tight ends, and outside of the top 12 in quarterbacks. Discussing where they are inside the top 35 wide receivers, top 20 quarterbacks, top 12 tight ends, and top 20 quarterbacks. That is us deciding who we don't want to play. And then our mid players, our favorite floor guys, which is our favorite quarterback 2 or 3, wide receiver 3 to 4, running back 2 to 4, or our favorite back end tight end 1, 2, 3. So with that being said, Drew, the floor is yours. You kind of segued this at the beginning of the show. Give us your bussin' pick for week 6.
Yeah, so the question was asked of which Minnesota receiver do I believe in, and the answer is very easily Jordan Addison for me. By now I'm sure we're all aware that Justin Jefferson has been placed on IR, which sucks ass. And while it is unfortunate and you never want to see any player go through an injury, we are in the fantasy football business. We have to react to this to some extent. And this should open up opportunity for even more targets for Jordan Addison. Right now this week, the Fantasy Pros ECR has him as wide receiver 27. I've got him up at wide receiver 21. In week 6, he gets a Bears defense that's given up the 11th most points to the wide receiver position so far through 5 weeks. And I personally think it'll be between him and TJ Hawkinson as the first option in this Vikings offense now that Justin Jefferson isn't in the picture for the next few weeks. Over the last 2 weeks, Jordan Addison has run 10 less routes than KJ Osborne, but he still has a higher air yard share and a higher yards per route run compared to Osborne. I just flat out think he's a more talented player. And I have faith he'll continue to earn more targets as the season goes on. And typically, rookie wide receivers, their snap percentages and their routes run just continue to go up and up. And I think with how long KJ Osborne's been in this offense on this team now, I think he's shown us what we could expect from him. And that's a few big plays here and there, not a lot of consistency. And I just think Jordan Addison is on a whole other level whenever it comes to talent. And this offense, I believe, is still going to continue to throw the ball a ton. So I think Addison and Hawkinson both are probably the two biggest beneficiaries of this Justin Jefferson injury.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Addison, certainly that first-round draft capital also helps his stock as well. And I'm in complete agreement with you on the fact that TJ Hawkinson is probably going to have some pretty big target weeks coming up ahead. But like we talked about, if you want to pick between Osborne and Addison, yeah, I can see where you can go either way, with Addison having higher upside, Osborne having experience within this offense. I could see completely where you are in that. But at the same time, like I said earlier in the show, wouldn't be shocked to see KJ Osborne have himself a few big target weeks. As for what he's going to do with them, we'll see. But I think, as we all know, in fantasy football, opportunity plays such a big part in what you're going to project. So just knowing that there's so many vacated targets coming off of Justin Jefferson and 2 other players just gives really all 3 of those guys more short-term value for sure. So moving into my Bussin play, I'm not going to lie, Drew, kind of cheated this week because whenever I made this pick, I was looking at the rankings and news had already broken that we might have ourselves a Devon Achane issue. But when I looked at the Fantasy Pros ECR rankings on Monday, Raheem Mostert was technically outside of the top 15. He was running back 16. Well, Achane goes on IR, and Raheem Mostert is technically running back 8 this week against Carolina in the Fantasy Pros ECR rankings. And I'm going to make the argument that he is still a Bussin play and he still qualifies because I think he's underranked this week. And I'm going to tell you why. In my mind, he's easily a top 5 running back play because he's playing against a Carolina Panthers defense that is giving up 141 rushing yards per game, 4.9 yards per carry, and has given up 9 rushing touchdowns so far this season to opposing running backs. That is the most in the NFL so far this year. They've also given up rushing first downs 29% of the time among their carries. It's an unreal matchup, and Raheem Mostert, like we just mentioned, his main competition is off the table with Devon Achane going on IR for the next 4 weeks. I know Jeff Wilson has had his 21-day window open, but let's be honest, with the year Mostert is having, we really shouldn't be that concerned about that. Not to mention, Mostert already has, with that 4-touchdown game, 7 rushing touchdowns this season. I believe that's tied for the league. And he's top 15 in total rushing yards this season at his position, with a positive game script that in all likelihood is going to help out that running game that's going to give him a lot of volume. To me, it's hard to see Raheem Mostert being anything but a 100-yard and 2-touchdown lock this week. And what I'm going to tell you is that with the next 4 weeks with Achane being out, I think Raheem Mostert is the type of guy that if you're in a redraft league, you should be trying to move heaven and earth to acquire him for your teams, because I believe that at this point with the Achane injury, we had talked about it in group chats earlier this week that we thought Achane had league-winning upside. He was starting to show that. Well, now that shifts over to Mostert because of the fact that he doesn't have that real competition for the next 4 weeks. So for me, it has to be the easiest Bussin call of the year so far with that matchup, with the fact that the competition will not be there, with the game script. Raheem Mostert should just demolish this week. And I've been wrong before, but I don't think this is one of those times.
I don't think it is either, and it looks like Dynasty Deviant agrees with you. So I think you're in good shape with this call.
Uh, so yeah, moving on and then talking about Chris, who couldn't be with us. He had a Bussin play, which knew where he was coming from. What do you think about his thought of Gabe Davis being a Bussin play this week?
I mean, I like it. Look, I mentioned the Scott Fishbowl League, how I had some success this past week. Gabe Davis was a big part of that, and he's been a lot more consistent than I thought he would be so far this year. And Josh Allen's playing good ball. I mean, he looks healthy. And that's, Gabe Davis was playing good ball at the beginning of last year before Josh Allen got injured and he couldn't really throw it deep as often. And so Gabe Davis became less effective. But so I think at this point you have to roll with him. And so I like the call.
Yeah, I agree with that. And like you said, we have not seen 4 touchdown Gabe Davis this year. We've seen shockingly consistent Gabe Davis. And our man Preston, what up, man? Glad to have you with us as always. So to recap our Bussin picks this week, I had Raheem Mostert, Drew had Jordan Addison, and Chris had Gabe Davis. Getting into our Disgussin picks, Drew, go ahead, lead us off. This is one that's probably going to hurt a lot of people's hearts, but go ahead and hit them with it.
Yeah, this one, it doesn't feel good to ever do this to like big name fantasy players, but Derrick Henry is my disgusting pick for this week. Fantasy Pros ECR has him as the running back 13 for week 6, but I've got him back. I've got him down to running back 18. This week he has to go up against a Baltimore Ravens defense that's given up the 11th least amount of points to the running back position so far, and right now he's averaging around 10 fantasy points less per game in Tennessee Titans losses than in wins. And as long as Lamar's receivers don't drop, 7 more passes this week, it's always tough to predict game script and who's going to win and lose and things like that. But I would be picking the Baltimore Ravens to win this game. So if you want to try to play that game with the Titans and the Ravens, I think that could be troubling for Derrick Henry. Last week, he only played 6% more snaps than Tajay Spears and was less productive with the touches that they both got. And this isn't necessarily like a Derrick Henry stinks take, because I don't think that. I've still seen a lot of good from Derrick Henry this year, and he's the same guy that we're used to in games that the Titans win. It's just a concern that he can be game scripted off the field a lot more this year with how talented Spears is and how comfortable Tennessee is putting him in the game and taking Henry off the field. So I just think that whenever it comes to Derrick Henry, his ranking this week, your expectations, if you're a Derrick Henry owner, I think you should just be tempering those. If you have Henry, you're likely still going to have to start him. I highly doubt you have enough better options to set him this week. So I wouldn't necessarily set him just to set him. I'm just saying, temper your expectations. This might not be a humongous Derrick Henry week.
All right, so let's just go ahead and ask the question because it's one worth asking at this point. Rest of the season, Derrick Henry or Tajay Spears?
Oh, yikes. I think I would still have to take Henry, but I just thought about that a lot longer than I would have if you would have asked me in week 1.
Yeah, I mean, heading into the season, I was really high on Tajay Spears as a dynasty play. What I wasn't expecting was for him to get as much snap share as he has through these first 5 weeks in this Tennessee Titans offense. I mean, I knew the pop was there. I knew there was some serious upside there. What I wasn't expecting was for that to happen. So, it does make that backfield on that offense, which was already terrible to predict, a lot harder to do so. So, yeah, your Bussin pick, our Disgussin pick is Derrick Henry. And I'm going to go ahead with my Disgussin pick and maybe break your heart a little bit, Drew, and I'm sorry for that in advance. But I'm going to go ahead and say Kyren Williams of your Los Angeles Rams against the Arizona Cardinals. I just don't see it. I don't see it this week. He enters this week as the expert consensus ranking running back 10. And I have to ask the question. I have to ask it out loud. Why is that a thing? So far this season, it seems like he's been an inefficient, high volume, touchdown heavy sort of volume back, which is great. And when he scored, his finishes have been running back 6, running back 4, and running back 3. So whenever he's scoring, fire him up. He's a great play. When he hasn't scored, he's finished as a running back 3 in both of those weeks, running back 28 and running back 31. He has a 3.9 yard per carry for the season with a season long. Can you guess what a season long is, Drew? I love playing this game with you.
His yards per carry?
No, his season long run for the year.
Oh, 9.
Oh, you're not giving him enough credit because the season long is actually 20 yards.
Oh, that's
but
pretty
still,
solid.
That's pretty solid. But, when you see guys like Mostert popping off 43s and A-Chain popping off 76s, I mean, let's be honest, he doesn't have that same sort of – he don't have that same sizzle.
No.
And in those first weeks 2 and 3, I think Kyren Williams had something like 17 targets in those 2 weeks. But since then, those targets have dried up, especially with Cooper Kupp's return last week and the emergence of Puka Nacua and Tutu still seeming to have a pretty solid target share within that offense. Gator is bouncing one off of us with Kupp back and Puka and Tutu. Don't we feel like the Rams will be more of a passing team? I think so, but you're the expert. You watch these guys on a weekly basis. You probably watched them in more depth than I did last week. What was your take on it when you saw them?
Yeah, I mean, Kyren Williams had his lowest target count since week 1. He had 2 targets in week 1, and then he had more than 2 every other week until Kupp came back this past week. So I do expect them to throw to the receivers more. I expect less dump offs to Kyren Williams. And I mean, you're spot on with the fact that, all of his top 10 finishes have come in games where he scored touchdowns. He's been very touchdown dependent. You said, why is him being in the top 10 a thing? And it's all the reasons that you said. It's because he scored touchdowns and because he's getting a ton of volume. But if you're talking about what he's done with the volume, his efficiency, things like that, those numbers aren't good. So if the Rams at any point decide to give other running backs some carries, or if Stafford does start going elsewhere with the ball, and whenever you look at the number of passing attempts, even before Kupp came back, whenever you look at the number of passing attempts that Stafford's had compared to the touchdowns he's thrown, the math don't math. Like, he should have more passing touchdowns than he does. And eventually that's going to come back to the norm if Stafford even just continues to throw at the rate he has been. So I think Kyren's a guy that you're going to be able to put in your lineup as a running back to pretty much every week, as long as they're still giving him the carries, because at this point, with all the injuries and bye weeks, people are just looking for warm bodies. So you're going to start him. But I think he's a guy that I said 2 weeks ago that I'd be trying to sell high on, and that's still the case right now. So, this week's a little tougher because Arizona has given up the 4th most points to the running back position so far through 5 weeks. So it is a good matchup for running backs. But if those touchdowns don't go Kyren's way, you might end up being disappointed, like you're saying.
But hold on. I'm so glad you said that, because I'm not done talking about Kyren Williams and why I don't like him this week. In theory, you're talking about, yes, the Arizona Cardinals being a very good matchup against running backs. They've given up a lot of points to running backs this season. But if you look at the guys who they've faced, first off, they've all been much more talented than Kyren Williams. You're talking about Brian Robinson, Saquon Barkley, Tony Pollard, Christian McCaffrey, and Joe Mixon has been the matchups for Arizona the first 5 weeks. And the majority of those points that they've given up, Tony Pollard had a 122-yard game against Arizona, and Christian McCaffrey had his monster 4-touchdown game against Arizona. So outside of those 2 games, you really, if you take those 2 out of the games, out of their fantasy points log, you're probably looking at a team that looks a lot better on paper in terms of rush defense, in terms of fantasy points. So for me, that tells me something with Kyren Williams, and is that if they're playing those types of guys and they're giving up really big points to only 2 of the most explosive backs in the league, in McCaffrey and Pollard, I'm not even going to try to pretend, despite the volume, that Kyren Williams is that level of dude. No. Not to mention the fact that Arizona has been in every game they've played this season. They've been pesky, which tells me that Los Angeles is probably going to have to lean on that pass a little more than they have in past weeks, especially with Cooper Kupp being back. So all that said, I don't see it for Kyren Williams this week for all of those circumstances. And going forward, if Cooper Kupp stays healthy, I agree. We're in the bye weeks. We have to have guys that we can plug in, and you want a guy with volume. But going forward, You start him, but I'm not just exactly sure how much I trust him in a situation. If the buys weren't there, would he be a guy I'd be starting on a weekly basis? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's fair. Until the volume comes down, I think you have to have him in there. But um, I haven't been his biggest fan. That one of the reasons that I was so high on Cam Akers coming into the year, as foolish as that looks now, is I was like, man, I mean, the competition behind Cam Akers isn't all that good. Like, I don't think Kyron Williams is all that special. And even though he's gotten all this work, I still watching every single Rams game. I do not think he has looked all that special. Um, but at the end of the day, volume's king. As long as he's getting it, you gotta throw him in there. But yeah, I'm with you. The top 10 might be. He won't hit top 10 if he doesn't get the touchdowns this week.
Yeah, agreed. So to recap, Drew's discussing pick this week was Derrick Henry. Mine was Kyron Williams. And Chris's discussing play this week was Jake Ferguson, the tight end for Dallas. So that is our bussin'. That is our discussing. Let's go ahead and get into our mid players, which to recap is our favorite quarterback 2 to 3, wide receiver 3 to 4, running back 2 to 4, or our favorite back end tight end 1, 2, tight end 3. Drew, you've been waiting for this moment, man. The floor is yours. Shine, baby. Shine on him.
It's my guy, man. I got to show him some love. I'm so happy I get to do this. This is partially a mid week 6 play, but then it's also one of my favorite stashes right now. He's available in 20%, 24% of leagues. Or I'm sorry, he's only rostered in 24% of leagues on Sleeper right now, which is wild to me. But running back Kendre Miller from the New Orleans Saints, he's one of the most high-value handcuffs to me right now behind Alvin Kamara. And then on top of that, last week he had 16 total opportunities against the Patriots and turned those into 90 total yards. Now, a lot of his touches did come in the fourth quarter, and it was a blowout game. The Saints were handing it to the New England Patriots, but he was extremely efficient with his touches, which is the same thing he did in college at TCU as well. And this week, the Saints get to face a Houston Texans defense that's given up the 7th most points to the running back position. And while I don't expect this game to be a blowout the way the Patriots game was, Houston, their offense has looked extremely good. I'm so happy to see CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, those guys shining. We were very much so on all of those trains this offseason. But he had a 36% snap percentage last week, the highest of his young rookie season so far. If he can continue to grow on that, there's a favorable matchup for fantasy running backs. And then I don't think Derek Carr is still 100% healthy either. And I think that could lead to, I think that's going to lead to more dump off opportunities because Carr just can't really go deep right now. And if that happens, that's something that Kendre Miller can take advantage of. I think he had something like a 40-something yard pass that he, and it was all pretty much after the catch. Like the actual dump off itself was right near the line of scrimmage, and then Kendre did the rest. But so he's not necessarily a guy I'm dying to start this week. I think if you're in a pinch between bye weeks, injuries, considering the matchup, considering his snap percentage taking a spike a little bit, even if it was due somewhat to the blowout, I think what they saw with the opportunities they gave him, I would think they'd be inclined to continue to give him some work. And so I think if you're in a pinch, you can start him. But above all else, make the room on your roster and stash Kendre Miller because he's one of the most valuable handcuffs out there right now, and he should not be available in 75% of leagues.
Okay, so I hear all of that, and as a Saints fan, I have to ask the question: when he comes off of IR, who's the Saints handcuff for the rest of the season? Is it Jamal Williams or is it Kendre Miller?
I think it should be Kendre Miller. I don't know if that's what's going to end up happening. I don't know what the Saints are going to do, but I think Kendre's already looked better than Jamal Williams has at this point in the year. The opportunities Jamal was getting at the start of the year compared to the opportunities that Kendre's got the last couple weeks, I think it's pretty clear who the better running back is. And so I would hope that it's going to be Kendre. That would be who I place my bets on. But just because us fantasy players think that teams should do something doesn't mean that NFL coaches are going to agree. Just take a look at Jahmyr Gibbs. So, we'll see what happens with that situation. But Kendre's who I'd place my bet on.
And coming as a fan of that particular team, I'm going to tell you that Dennis Allen has tried to cut himself a Sean Payton cloth. And the Sean Payton MO has always been to have a pass catching guy and to have that guy he can use between the tackles. So when Jamal Williams comes back, I know we want the Kendrick Miller thing to be a thing. But ultimately, what it's probably going to end up being is the fact that we're going to see a healthy dose of Kamara, a decent dose of Jamal Williams, and a little smattering of Kendra here and there, unfortunately. So that's what it's probably going to be.
That would make me very sad.
That would make you very sad. That would make me very sad because we all know the upside that Kendrick Miller possesses. But going in and continuing to talk about mid picks, Chris opted for Brian Robinson this week, which I can't disagree. Brian Robinson has been a pretty solid floor play all season. And as for my mid pick, I'm going to stay within this Miami-Carolina game and go, yes, Rougarou, I completely agree. If Pete Carmichael can pull his head out of there, we may be on to something, because despite the fact that it was a 38-0 game, the Saints still only had 314 total yards of offense last week.
Exactly, Chris. That's what I'm saying, man. Like Kamara was out. Kendrick Miller was out at the start of the year. Jamal had the floor. I mean, just here, take it. And he didn't do shit with it. So it's just like, please don't put us through that again, man. Let Kendrick ball out. Like, you give him the touches you were giving Jamal, that man's going to put in work. Please don't do this to us anymore. Like, let us have the good young players and not the player that is inefficient. And I know he's a fan favorite. He seems like an incredible guy. I'd love to sit down and have a drink with him, but I don't want to watch him play football over Kendrick Miller.
Yeah, me either. I'm just going to go ahead and say me either. But let's go ahead and let's talk about my mid player staying within that matchup. Adam Thielen versus Miami. 33-year-old Adam Thielen is having himself one heck of a season and still enters the Fantasy Pros ECR rankings as wide receiver 20 this week, and will likely face what we think is a very strong negative game script. He's been the target hog in Carolina over the past month, these past 4 weeks. His target totals have been 9, 14, 8, and 13 targets over these past 4 weeks. Total that up, quick math, I believe that's 44 targets. So averaging 11 targets per game over the past 4 weeks, and has had touchdowns in 3 of those 4 games, and has actually 3 of the 5 Carolina Panther passing touchdowns for the season, and is facing a Miami Dolphins defense that is giving up 169.2 yards per game to wide receivers this season. Per Fantasy Pros metrics, they have their projections and their actuals. He's outperformed their projections in 4 of his 5 weeks this season. Per Player Profiler, this is actually a shocking stat considering that Bryce Young hasn't been great and they played Andy Dalton. Adam Thielen has had an 87.9% catchable target rate this season, which is 6th in the NFL, which tells me they're putting the ball around him. And when Adam Thielen gets the ball around him, in all likelihood, he is going to catch that ball. So he's been consistent across the board this season. And I believe something else that I saw is versus man coverage, he's getting an average of 2.3 yards per separation versus man coverage so far this season. So that is another plus for the man Adam Thielen, playing 89% of snaps, running routes in 99% of the route participation. So just on the field all the time, being used all the time. There's no reason to think it won't continue this week. I mean, I may be speaking with a little bit of bias right now because I did acquire Adam Thielen and I'm putting a lot of stock in what he's done so far this year. But to say that he's going to do anything other than hit his floor this week, I would think would be foolish. But what do you think?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Adam Thielen was a guy that coming into the year I was much lower on than I should have been. I thought the dude was cooked. Like what I saw from him in Minnesota last year, I thought he was cooked, and I tried to change my tune. I made him my Bussin play my mid play as well a couple weeks ago whenever they played Seattle. So I like it, man. I do. You got to keep riding this thing out. I mean, the touchdowns eventually, like, he's not gonna scored 3 touchdowns every 5 games all season. But as Chris mentioned in the YouTube comments, Miami's corners have not necessarily been an extremely tough matchup so far for wide receivers. If you look at it, to be exact, let's see. They've given up the 14th most points to the wide receiver position, and that's factoring in they played the New England Patriots in week 2, and they played the New York Giants last week. 2 teams that did absolutely nothing with their wide receivers, which has been the case all year. But the Chargers receivers had no problems, the Denver Broncos receivers had no problems, and the Buffalo Bills receivers had no problems. So I think we know which trend is more realistic whenever you talk about, are they the defense they look like whenever they played New England, or the Giants, or are they defense they look like every other week? So I think this is a plus matchup for Thielen, and he's looked really good in those. So I think you have to continue to fire him up.
Fire him up on a weekly basis. Start Adam Thielen. We are on the record. We're riding with that. So that is it for Bussin, Disgussin, and Mid. To recap, in our Bussin segment, Drew had Jordan Addison, I had Raheem Mostert, and Chris had Gabe Davis. For Disgussin, Drew had Derrick Henry, I had Kyron Williams, and Chris had Jake Ferguson. And for our midsection, Drew had Kendre Miller, Chris had Brian Robinson, and I had Adam Thielen. Just once again, a reminder, if you are on Twitter or Facebook, hop over to YouTube, ask us any questions you might have. But Drew, moving forward, it's that time. I don't know if there were any emergencies going on around where you live today, but normally with an emergency, whether it's the police, firefighters, ambulance, we got to ring the alarm, baby. And when we ring the alarm on Fourth and Frames, we're talking about players who have had a couple of bad weeks or 1 week, and we're out here trying to figure out whether we should ring the alarm or whether we should cancel the alert and say that these guys are still good to go. So the first guy we're going to talk about so far this season has had 1,258 passing yards, 5 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Has carried the ball 30 times for 132 yards. Is QB 20 in points per game at 15.1. QB 17 in total fantasy points at 75.5. QB 10 is 20 points ahead of him. So, Drew, I have to ask you, when it comes to Jacksonville Jaguars quarterback Trevor Lawrence, should we ring the alarm or cancel the alert on the pride of Duval?
Is there something in the middle, like between ringing the alarm and cancel the alert? Because I'm worried. I don't know if I'm like sound the alarms, ring the alert worried, but I am a little concerned about Trevor Lawrence. And I'll say this offseason, you had to draft him around like the quarterback 7, quarterback 8 range in terms of his ADP if you wanted to have Trevor Lawrence on your fantasy team. And if I was doing a rest of season quarterback rankings, I'd probably have him in like the quarterback 9, quarterback 10. So it's not a huge difference in terms of numbers, but you're talking about the quarterback 7 in the draft process versus the quarterback 9 or 10. That's like a 3-4 round difference in where those guys were going in terms of ADP. So I think you might have trouble with him returning his offseason ADP. He's had a 40% completion percentage in the red zone. A ton of those passes they've been completed passes, but they've been out of bounds. They're running the ball more in the red zone. Travis Etienne is getting workhorse usage. So that's resulted in Trevor Lawrence having less passing TDs than we would have expected up to this point. And his rushing hasn't been bad, but if you're not like an elite rushing quarterback, typically you need like the 40, 50 passing touchdowns to get into that elite area of fantasy quarterbacks if you're not going to be, an elite rusher in that area. So I'm not dropping Trevor Lawrence, but he does, according to, if we just go off of what's happened through the first 5 weeks so far this year, he has the most difficult schedule for fantasy quarterbacks the rest of the way. He's got a good matchup. I like him this week against Indy. I'll say that. I think you fire him up against Indy this week, but then he's got matchups against the Saints and the Steelers before he goes into a bye week, and then he's got San Francisco weeks 14 and 15. He's got matchups with Cleveland and Baltimore. Like he's got some tough. There's going to be some tough matchups along the way, but so I don't think you drop him. If somebody's still out there and is willing to cash in on the name value, maybe after he has if he has the week I think he can have against Indianapolis this week, which I think will be a good one. I think you fire him up with confidence. Maybe then you turn around and you try to package Lawrence plus one of your depth options and go get a better quarterback. Go try to climb the ladder a little bit. Go get a Lamar or somebody like that. That would be how I would approach it. So I am a little bit worried about Trevor Lawrence, but I'm not fully ringing the alarm, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. Because, like you said, first off, the talent is so obvious. We all see it.
Yeah,
We know
he's played really well this year. Like, he really has. Like, his quarterback play has been fine. I haven't loved the play calling. He's had to deal with some drops and things like that. But I don't think Trevor Lawrence has looked bad, which is why I'm not ready to fully ring the alarm.
And it's also, I think, something that's kind of being underplayed is the fact that just how important Zay Jones is to Trevor Lawrence's comfort. I don't know if you've noticed, but some of Trevor Lawrence's worst performances so far this season have been while Zay Jones has been out.
Yeah.
Zay Jones is just one of these guys that for some reason, he doesn't have a lot of name value, but he means something, a significant something to this Jacksonville offense. So, with Zay Jones being questionable this week, I do think the Indianapolis matchup is still a good one. But whether or not Zay Jones plays or whether he sits might have some effect on the Lawrence ceiling. So I agree with you. We're not fully sounding the alarm yet. We're not canceling the alert. Rougarou says he thinks the Jags have figured it out and will boom from here on out. I mean, that's a fair take as well. But yeah, for now, we are, I guess we're holding on Trevor Lawrence with a bullet. For the second guy in our ring the alarm section, we have a player who has carried the ball 84 times for 328 yards with only one rushing touchdown, 13 receptions for 80 yards with no touchdowns. Is running back 24 in points per game at 10.7 per game, running back 19 overall and 20 in total fantasy points with 53.3. I'm going to go ahead and take this one. Joe Mixon, running back for the Cincinnati Bengals, and I'm going to tell you guys, shockingly, to cancel the alert, and here's why I feel that way. 2 weeks ago, we were talking about we're not sure if Joe Burrow is fully healthy. And we weren't sure what this offense was going to look like without Joe Burrow. Well, last week, Joe Burrow looked like Joe Burrow in a big way. Like, he looked like he's back. Obviously, you take that on a week-to-week basis, but I'm assuming with the maintenance they're doing, he's only going to look better and better and better as the season goes on. He flashed that classic Joe swag last week. It rubbed off on Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon had 29 touches last week. And if Cincinnati catches fire, Joe Mixon is going to benefit from that. He's going to get the volume. We know he is the running back in that offense. There's nobody else that is really touching the ball, which means he doesn't need high efficiency to necessarily score points. And I know he only has one touchdown so far this season, but if this Cincinnati offense catches fire, it's up, baby. Those touchdowns are going to come for everybody around him. That includes Joe Mixon, because they're not going to be scoring 20-yard touchdowns every play. There are going to be some goal line opportunities for Mixon to take it in. He may have lost a step by this point. I'm willing to concede that. But he is still the king of that running game. And when you're getting 29 touches a week, similar to the Kyron Williams argument we made earlier, I'm not going to bet against a guy that is touching the ball 30 times per game. So with that said, Joe Mixon, cancel the alert.
Yeah,
Thoughts?
I agree. I agree 100%. And Zach Taylor's really not doing Joe Mixon any favors either. I think Najee Harris, I believe, is the only – there might be one other running back, I'm not sure, but Najee Harris is one of only maybe two running backs that have more rushes just straight up the gut, like the highest percentage of rushes just going straight up the gut, like not a whole lot of creativity going on, whenever it comes to getting the ball in Joe Mixon's hands. But as you mentioned, that we haven't seen this offense at its peak yet. If you told me Mixon's going to get 25, 30 touches in this offense and he's only going to have one touchdown so far through the year, I would have been shocked. But with what we know about this offense so far through the year, I think we can only expect that number to go up. And so I think he's a guy. If you're hurting at running back, I think he's a decent trade target. And yes, somebody that I would agree completely to cancel the alert on.
And so, that being said, we have one more we want to get to. This man has had 23 catches for 290 yards, 2 touchdowns, wide receiver 30 in points per game at 10.5, wide receiver 27 in overall fantasy points at 52.5. So, Drew, Devontae Smith, wide receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles. Are we ringing the alarm or are we canceling the alert?
I think this is a cancel the alert. I'm not as concerned with this one as I was with Trevor Lawrence. We're 5 weeks into the season. He's had 3 really solid weeks and he's had 2 off weeks. Wide receiver has always been a less consistent position for fantasy purposes week to week compared to the running back position. Like no matter how good they are, receivers are going to have up and down weeks. You just have to kind of go along for the ride. But Devontae Smith is still an extremely, extremely talented player and a great offense with an incredible quarterback. But he has other options around him. There's going to be weeks where AJ Brown goes off. There's going to be weeks like last week where Dallas Goedert's going to get his. Like whenever you have this many options, there's going to be up and down weeks, but you have to take the good with the bad whenever it comes to guys like Devontae Smith. And over the course of a season, I fully believe there will be much more good than bad. And the cherry on top, your reward for being patient and holding on to him is in the fantasy playoffs. And again, I know this is far away. We're talking about weeks 15, 16, and 17, but in the fantasy playoffs, the Philadelphia Eagles play the Seattle Seahawks, the New York Giants, and the Arizona Cardinals.
Oh, baby.
All 3 weeks. Locked and loaded matchups for fantasy wide receivers. So there's going to be bumps and bruises. There's going to be ups and downs. Just don't forget how good he is and how good the offense he's in is. You'll be fine. And if somebody out there is panicking on Devontae Smith, I think he's another awesome trade target after this down week that he had against the Rams.
Buy low
Yes.
on Devontae Smith. Way too talented. So Gator, our beloved producer, has a bonus ring the alarm for us. He's asking if after last week, can we cancel the alert on AJ Smith? AJ Dillon. Last week, AJ Dillon had 20 carries for 76 yards and a touchdown and only had 1 target and 0 receptions. So knowing that and knowing that he averages 3 yards a carry for the season, Drew, are we ready to say, are we willing to say the stink is off of AJ Dillon?
No, not at all. He couldn't average more than 4 yards a carry against the Las Vegas Raiders, and this will probably, like, assuming Aaron Jones comes back after their bye week this coming week and plays the rest of the year, that'll probably be the best game he has all year. So if somebody, assuming health, Aaron Jones is out the rest of the way. If somebody does believe in what we saw from AJ Dillon this past week, I would happily try to package him with another player and go level up at the position in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, he's one of these guys where, you love the profile, you love what he looks like on the field. I mean, the man has quads of steel, but ultimately he struggled this season. And that Green Bay Packers offense, let's face it, without Aaron Rodgers is just hasn't quite looked the same. I know we have to give Jordan Love some time and a little bit of grace, but it's not quite there yet. And with Aaron Jones returning, we can't just give us a full endorsement of AJ Dillon. So we've rung the alarm. To recap, we are ringing the alarm on Trevor Lawrence somewhat. We are canceling the alert on both Joe Mixon and Devontae Smith. So, final segment, and we're going to get through it quickly. Our frame it players for the week. We're going to talk about guys that we're high on heading into this new week, outside of the wide receiver 20, outside of the top 15 running backs, outside of the top 8 tight ends, and outside of the top 12 quarterbacks. I was willing to finally cancel my alert on Brock Purdy because, Drew, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. he may be matchup proof at this point. He's been solid in every game that he's played. He's been a 200-yard guy, 2 touchdowns every week. Has had a 72.1 completion percentage with 9 touchdowns and no interceptions so far this season. Quarterback finishes of quarterback 10, 23, 13, 11, and 7. So he's more or less been a low-end quarterback 1 throughout the season. Playing a Cleveland team that has had numbers that have been deceiving. They've played a hurt Joe Burrow, Kenny Pickett, Ryan Tannehill, and Lamar Jackson, who Lamar Jackson had 28.1 fantasy points against them last week. So those numbers that say they might not be a good matchup for him are somewhat deceiving. I think we should see another steady performance out of Brock Purdy. I think the game script will be there. I think that 220-yard floor and a couple of touchdowns and feeding the guys around him is a safe way to look at it. You know, I'm going to go ahead and say it after you crow on the Brock Purdy thing because I wasn't high on him heading into the season. And I may just have to say that I am wrong. So my favorite guy this week is Brock Purdy. Drew, what about you?
Yeah, so first of all, I agree with your take. I also was low on Brock Purdy, but whenever you look at his schedule coming up, he's got after this tough matchup against Cleveland, he's got Minnesota on the schedule, Jacksonville, Seattle, Philly, Seattle again, Arizona, Washington. Like he's got some very beatable matchups. So it's looking like Brock Purdy might be a solid option the rest of the way. I've also got a guy as my favorite player that I was not as high on coming into the year. And it was actually a guy that you did a profile on this offseason. And you kind of turned me on him a little bit. And then his play pretty much every week other than this past week also helped that as well. It's James Cook, with the running back for the Buffalo Bills, and he had an awful week. No way about it. You know, no two ways about it. Against Jacksonville this past week, his worst week of the year so far. According to Fantasy Pros ECR, he comes in as the running back 17. I got him just a few spots higher than that at running back 15. Nothing crazy, but whenever you look at who he's playing this week, that's the big thing for me. Is they play the New York Giants. They've given up the 5th most points to the running back position. Pretty much everybody that has played the New York Giants, they all get theirs. And I think that this is going to be a big bounce back week for James Cook. I expect him to do pretty much what he did every week of the year before this year. He's going to play around 60% of snaps and probably get, 18 to 22, 23 touches, and I think he'll be overall productive with them. And then if he does happen to find the end zone, which the New York Giants tend to let people do, then I think you'll be extremely happy. So I think you can expect a bounce back week from James Cook this week.
Yeah, all fair play. All good points you're making right there. And Chris had his favorite player. He was going with Josh Downs this week. Coming off of a breakout game last week where he had 6 catches for 97 yards and a long of 38. 2 weeks ago against Baltimore, had 8 catches for 57 yards. On the season, 23 catches for 255 yards. So Josh Downs has kind of been under the radar, giving us a pretty solid rookie season so far. So, all that being said, that's it for us this week. Just a programming reminder for everyone who's listening. Our IDP show, Shoot the Gap, will be Friday at 10 p.m., and I believe it's going to be that way going forward. But before we get out of here, Drew, go ahead and plug yourself, man. What do you got going on? Tell us what you're talking about on the artist formerly known as Twitter, the X. Let it happen, bud.
Still Twitter in my heart. So you can find me at Drew3Amar. I'm here almost every Wednesday night. Had to miss last week, but glad to be back. And then I'll have a start sit article coming out. I believe Friday or Saturday, sometime this weekend. I have a start sit article coming out for your lineups as well. So you can find that on the Fantasy and Frames website. You can find that on the Fantasy and Frames Twitter account, as where you can also find my weekly rankings as well. So check out Fantasy and Frames Twitter, check out the Fantasy and Frames website, and then I'm on Twitter too. You can see it on the screen.
Yeah, and there's always a ton of awesome content coming out on the Fantasy and Frames website, the YouTube channel. Our producer, Gator J, does an amazing job on shorts with all these shows that we do every week. Pre-game show on Sunday mornings, 3 hours just jam-packed with good times and good knowledge, just like people are just working their butts off on a weekly basis. And we need to be rewarding these people. Give us your likes, give us your follows. You know, these are all people that I see so highly, like have helped improve my personal process as a player. And, you know, it's an iron sharpens iron situation. So if you want league winning
Yes, sir.
advice, go ahead and visit us at fantasyandframes.com. Our boy, our co-host Chris Battistel can be found at FFChrisB on Twitter, always dropping that fire on Twitter on a weekly basis. I can be found on Twitter at rmanuelsports. You can follow Fantasy and Frames in general at Fantasy and Frames for all your latest show updates, articles, things like that. We're always dropping that content. So that's it. Another one bites the dust, as Queen used to say. So for our boy Chris Battistel, who couldn't be with us tonight, for my boy Drew Scott, I am Rhett Manuel. Y'all be blessed. We gone.